It started on a Monday, which already felt like punishment enough without an HOA note fluttering under my windshield wiper. Big red letters across the top shouted, "Notice of Violation," and below it, in prim serif type, "Vehicle improperly parked on community roadway." I stared at it for a moment, coffee in one hand, disbelief in the other. My car wasn't blocking anyone. It wasn't leaking oil, playing music, or staging a coup. It was simply parked in front of my own house, on a street I'd personally helped repave years ago when the HOA budget had mysteriously vanished into decorative signage improvements. Across the street, I spotted Gladys from the HOA board peering through her lace curtains like a hawk in bifocals. I gave her a polite wave. She ducked back behind the curtain, presumably to write a follow-up report. By lunchtime, 3 more notices had appeared, one taped to my mailbox, one shoved into the door handle, and one delivered by a man in an HOA windbreaker who said his name was Cliff Compliance Officer. Cliff had the kind of clipboard that made him feel taller. He tapped it like a judge's gavel and said, "Sir, per Section 14B of the Neighborhood Agreement, street parking beyond 24 hours is strictly prohibited." "Interesting," I said, "because I'm pretty sure this street isn't even technically theirs." He frowned, clearly not used to people talking back in full sentences. "It's in the HOA boundaries." "Maybe," I said, "but boundaries can be funny things." He scribbled something dramatic on his clipboard, probably non-compliant resident exhibits sarcasm, and stalked off. That evening I pulled out my old files. I'd bought my house 10 years earlier, a foreclosure property that came with a tangled history of land transfers. I remembered my lawyer mentioning something odd at closing, that the developer had never properly transferred ownership of certain road parcels to the HOA because of a lien dispute. I dug until I found it, a map stamped with a faded county seal. According to the document, the entire stretch of street in front of my house, plus another 100 feet in both directions, was still registered under a holding company that, after a bit of searching, turned out to have been quietly dissolved. When companies like that dissolve, their assets revert to the last legal claimant. In this case, that claimant was me. The coffee suddenly tasted sweeter. Still, I didn't want to escalate. I figured a calm chat with the board would clear it up. So the next evening, I attended their meeting. They held it in the clubhouse, a beige room that smelled faintly of stale cookies and power trips. Gladys presided at the head table, flanked by Cliff and 2 other board members whose main contribution seemed to be nodding in unison. "Mr. Turner," she said crisply when it was my turn, "we've received multiple complaints about your vehicle obstructing community aesthetics." "My car is obstructing aesthetics?" I asked. "It's a 4-year-old hybrid, not a monster truck." "Aesthetics," she repeated, as if the word itself were sacred scripture. "All vehicles must be garaged or parked in driveways." I laid the map gently on the table. "Then perhaps you'll be pleased to know that, technically, the area where my car sits isn't part of HOA property." They leaned forward. Cliff adjusted his glasses. Gladys sniffed. "That's absurd. Of course the street belongs to the association." I pointed to the faded county seal. "According to the records office, it doesn't. The developer never filed the transfer. The company defaulted, and I purchased the residual rights when I bought my house." For a long moment, only the wall clock ticked. Then Gladys pursed her lips. "We'll review this with our legal counsel." Translation: they didn't believe me, but they were nervous enough to check. By Friday, another notice appeared, this one even redder than before. Final warning: vehicle subject to towing. That was when I decided to make things official. The county clerk's office confirmed it in writing. Parcel R412, encompassing 0.17 miles of roadway, was indeed titled to James R. Turner, me. I even paid the back taxes, which came to the princely sum of $42. With that receipt, ownership was beyond dispute. The next morning, I installed 2 small metal signs on either end of the street. Not flashy, just professional black letters on silver background: Private Road, Owner J.R. Turner. By noon, Gladys and Cliff were at my door, both looking as if someone had replaced their morning coffee with vinegar. "Mr. Turner," Gladys began tightly, "we need to discuss unauthorized signage. Ah, I said. You mean the signs marking my property? Feel free to discuss, but do it on the sidewalk, please. The street's mine. They exchanged glances. Cliff actually looked at the pavement beneath his feet, as if expecting it to vanish. This can't be right, Gladys said. Would you like to see the deed? I asked, holding up the folder. And that's when I saw it, the flicker of doubt turning to full-blown panic. They had been so used to ordering people around that it occurred to them the ground they stood on might literally belong to someone else. I smiled, friendly as ever. Don't worry, I'm a generous landlord. They didn't smile back. When they left, Cliff tripped slightly over the curb, and I swear I heard him mutter, "We're gonna need a meeting." I went back inside, poured myself another cup of coffee, and looked out the window at my perfectly parked car gleaming in the afternoon sun. For the first time in years, the street felt truly peaceful, mostly because it was finally mine. The following week, I became public enemy number 1 at the HOA clubhouse. Apparently, they'd called an emergency meeting titled Addressing Unauthorized Street Ownership. By Tuesday, every board member had parked their matching beige SUVs on my newly confirmed private road, ironically in violation of their own bylaws. When I stepped outside with my mug of coffee, Gladys waved a clipboard like it was a badge. "Mr. Turner, we've consulted legal counsel, and your so-called ownership claim will not stand." "Oh?" I said. "Did they read the deed?" She blinked. "What?" "The deed," I repeated. "It's what lawyers usually read before declaring ownership so-called." Cliff, the compliance officer, spoke up. "You can't just own a street, sir." I sipped my coffee. "Apparently I can. It's America." They conferred in low tones, clearly not expecting me to be so calm. Then Gladys said, "Until this is resolved, we're instructing you to remove your car immediately." "From my road?" "Yes." "That's bold," I said, "considering you're all currently trespassing on it." The silence that followed was the most beautiful sound I'd heard since moving there. By sunset, the HOA had doubled down. I woke the next morning to find orange cones lined along both ends of my street, as if they were blocking off a crime scene. A huge sign appeared overnight, "Road under HOA Review, no parking allowed." I had to admire the dedication. That afternoon, I drove down to the county offices again. The clerk, a cheerful woman named Patty who clearly loved seeing the HOA get humbled, helped me file a formal declaration of access rights. Basically, it meant that any restrictions or signage placed on the road required my permission. "Want me to stamp it official?" Patty asked, already wielding her ink pad. "Make it loud," I said. She grinned and gave it 3 stamps for good measure. That night, I printed 10 laminated notices and taped them to the cones. Notice: this is private property under the ownership of J.R. Turner. Unauthorized signage or obstruction will be treated as trespassing per county code. By morning, the cones were gone. So were the HOA cars. But I had a feeling it wasn't over. Sure enough, Friday brought a letter, hand-delivered, embossed with gold trim like a royal decree. "Dear Mr. Turner," it began, "after consulting our attorney, the association maintains authority over all communal infrastructure, including but not limited to roads, walkways, and curbs. Failure to comply with HOA parking standards will result in fines of up to $500 per incident." At the bottom was a signature, Reginald P. Thistle, HOA Legal Counsel. I called the number listed. A polite voice answered, "Law offices of Thistle and Bell." "Yes," I said. "I'd like to confirm that you represent the Maple Ridge HOA?" "That's correct, sir." "Perfect," I said. "Because you're about to receive an invoice for unauthorized use of private property. Let's see, I glanced out the window. 6 vehicles times 2 hours each at market rate parking. Let's round it to $50 a car. That's 300 total. The line went quiet for a moment. Then, "I'm sorry, what?" "You can send payment by check," I said cheerfully, "or I'll just forward it to small claims. Whatever's easier." He stammered, "I'll have to call you back." They didn't. Instead, I got a knock on my door Saturday morning. Not from the HOA this time, from a sheriff's deputy. He was polite, even friendly. "Sir, I've been asked to check on a reported property dispute." "Ah," I said, handing him my folder. "The famous road war. Here's the deed, county map, and tax receipt." He flipped through them, nodded, and actually chuckled. "Yeah, this is solid. Looks like you really do own the street." He tore up the HOA's complaint notice right in front of me. "You're good here, Mr. Turner. Mind if I tell my partner this story later?" "Only if you make me sound cooler than I am." He laughed, tipped his hat, and left. By that evening, the HOA newsletter had gone out. A friend texted me a photo of the headline, "Community confusion regarding street jurisdiction." Confusion, huh? That was one way to describe it. For a few days, things went quiet. No notes, no cones. Even Gladys seemed to retreat to her curtain surveillance post. But calm never lasts long in HOA territory. One morning, I heard the rumble of engines outside. When I looked, I nearly dropped my coffee. The HOA had called in a tow truck. 2, actually. Cliff stood proudly beside them, hands on hips as if directing an action movie. I stepped outside just as one of the drivers started hooking my car's front tire. "Whoa, easy there," I said, holding up my hand. "You realize you're about to tow a vehicle off private property, right?" Cliff smirked. "We have authorization." "From who?" "The HOA." "Fantastic," I said. "And do they have authorization from the owner?" That got their attention. The driver hesitated. "Wait, who's the owner?" I pointed down at the asphalt. "You're standing on him." The tow guys looked confused. Cliff started to argue, but I cut him off. "Here's the deal. I don't want to make this ugly, but if you move that car 1 inch, it'll be considered unauthorized impoundment from private land, which means I'll own your truck by next week." The drivers exchanged glances. Then, without a word, they unhooked the car, climbed back into their cabs, and drove away. Cliff sputtered, You can't threaten contractors." "I didn't," I said. "I just explained property law." He stormed off, muttering something about lawyers and audits. I waved after him, smiling. For the next few days, peace returned again. Kids rode bikes down my road. Neighbors stopped pretending not to know me. A few even asked quietly how I'd managed to beat the board. I told them the truth. I didn't beat them. I just read the paperwork. They laughed, but I could see it dawning on them. For years, everyone had just assumed the HOA owned everything they claimed to. Turns out, assumptions aren't deeds. The next week, the HOA switched tactics. They went from legal threats to public relations. Overnight, they set up a sandwich board at the entrance of the subdivision that read, "Community streets under temporary review. Please report unapproved signs." It was classic HOA spin. They couldn't win the deed fight, so they'd try to drown me in neighborhood gossip. Soon enough, a few neighbors started whispering. One even asked if I was planning to charge tolls. I laughed. No tolls. Though if they keep printing signs, I might start a printing fee. Then came the newsletter bombshell. Gladys had written a special bulletin warning residents to avoid confrontation with individuals claiming independent property ownership. I was officially an individual, so I did what any reasonable individual would do. I called the county again, this time the Department of Transportation. "Hi," I said. "Can you confirm who's responsible for maintenance on parcel R412? "Let me check." The clerk paused, typing. "That'd be you, Mr. Turner. You're listed as the private owner." "Perfect," I said. "Can I register it as a limited access road?" She hesitated. "You mean like a gated private drive?" "Exactly." There was a long pause. "Technically, yes, but you'd need signage and basic maintenance logs." "I've got a rake and a broom," I said. "Send me the forms." 2 days later, a plain brown envelope arrived. Private road registration packet. Inside were instructions, a small reflective sign sticker, and a map showing my new designation. That weekend, I put up my new sign. Right beside the mailbox, in tasteful brushed steel, "Private road. Access by permission only." It wasn't flashy, but the HOA noticed instantly. I know because Gladys almost dropped her dog leash when she saw it. By Monday morning, a board inspection party arrived, 3 people in matching visors with clipboards. They took pictures of my sign, measured the curb, and spoke in hushed tones. I opened the door. "Can I help you folks?" "Routine survey," Gladys said quickly. "Ensuring compliance with community standards." "Wonderful," I said. "But before you step on the pavement, I need you to sign this visitor log, liability reasons." She frowned. "Liability?" "Well," I said, "as the road owner, I'm required to keep a record of everyone entering. Insurance, you know." Cliff muttered, "This is ridiculous." "Probably," I agreed. "But it's legal." They refused to sign, of course, so they just stood awkwardly on the curb taking photos from a distance. That evening, I baked cookies. Not for them, just because victory goes well with sugar. 2 days later, a new letter came. This one was thicker, heavier, and sealed with a red sticker that said urgent. Inside was a formal notice of community hearing. The HOA was convening to determine disciplinary measures for non-compliance. It was scheduled for Thursday at 7 p.m. So I went. When I arrived, the clubhouse was packed, residents murmuring, Gladys glaring, Cliff already flipping through his clipboard like it contained state secrets. "Mr. Turner," Gladys began, "you are here to answer for repeated violations of Community Code 12A concerning signage, obstruction, and disrespect of the association's authority." "Happy to," I said, "but before we start, could you clarify something?" She folded her hands. "Yes?" "Is this meeting taking place on Maple Ridge property or on the road parcel owned by J.R. Turner?" Her mouth tightened. "We're in the clubhouse." "Which is reached," I said, "by the road parcel owned by J.R. Turner." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Even Cliff looked uncertain. Gladys slammed her gavel, a plastic one from the craft store. "Order! We will not tolerate mockery." I opened my folder and spread out the papers, the county deed, the maintenance registration, the tax receipts. "These aren't mockery. These are facts." Someone in the back whispered, "Wait, he really owns the street?" Gladys tried to wave it off. "Regardless of ownership, all residents must follow HOA guidance." "Even the owner of the road they drive on?" Her jaw clenched. "Tell you what," I said, "since you all seem confused, I'll make it easy. Effective tomorrow, Maple Ridge HOA is welcome to continue using my road at no charge for residential access. But any enforcement activity, parking citations, or towing operations require a written permit from me." A stunned silence fell. Someone actually clapped. Gladys banged the gavel again, but it just made a hollow thunk. "Mr. Turner," she hissed, "you are undermining community order." "Not at all," I said. "I'm preserving it. If you want order, you need ownership clarity, and I have the clarity." The meeting ended in chaos. Half the residents were whispering congratulations. The other half were taking photos of my paperwork with their phones. By Friday, the HOA's website had quietly updated. The road that used to be listed as community property, Section C, was now private access, easement by permission. Gladys didn't speak to me for a week. Then came the funniest moment yet. I was out front raking leaves when a delivery truck stopped. The driver asked, "Hey, this Maple Ridge?" "Technically, yes," I said, "but you're on Turner Lane." He looked at his GPS. "Says Maple Ridge Drive." "Common mistake," I said. "The map's catching up." He shrugged and drove on. Later that day, I got an email from Patty at the county office. "Just letting you know your private road registration was approved. Also, someone from the HOA called asking if they could appeal it. We said no. I laughed so hard I nearly dropped my phone. The HOA had spent months writing fines and memos, and now they couldn't even repave the street without my permission. I sat on the curb that evening, sipping iced tea, watching the sunset reflect on my car's hood, the same car that had started this whole circus. Funny thing about ownership. People think it's about money or control, but sometimes it's just about reading the fine print no one else bothers to. A few weeks passed in blissful quiet. The HOA newsletter began featuring tips on neighborly cooperation instead of violations of the month. Cliff started waving when he drove by. Even Gladys's curtains twitched with less hostility. I figured the peace would last about as long as a cup of hot coffee on my porch. 5 minutes tops, but it was nice while it held. Then one morning, a bright yellow flyer appeared in every mailbox. Community Beautification Project, new landscaping and pavement seal planned for Maple Ridge Drive. I actually laughed out loud. They were planning to repave my road, so I printed my own flyer and taped it beside the clubhouse door. Attention, HOA. All construction on Turner Lane requires owner approval. Permit fee, $1. The one was deliberate, just enough to make it legal, not greedy. By noon, I had a personal visit. Gladys looked exasperated, clipboard in hand as always. "James," she began in the weary tone of someone who's been fact-checked too many times. "This isn't funny." "I agree," I said. "You should probably file that permit before the contractors arrive." "You can't charge us to work on our own road." "Correction," I said. "My road. And I'm not charging you. I'm offering a symbolic fee so the paperwork's tidy." She sighed the way only an HOA president can. "Fine. I'll pay the stupid $1. I produced a simple printed receipt that said, "Turner Lane Maintenance Permit, valid for 1-day use." Fee received, $1. She signed it, handed over a crisp bill, and left muttering something about retirement. 2 days later, the contractors showed up. They worked quickly, sealing the asphalt, repainting the lines, leaving the place looking perfect. When they were done, I noticed something new, a small metal sign at the end of the street. Property maintained by Maple Ridge HOA. Ah, the audacity. So that evening, armed with a screwdriver and a sense of poetic justice, I replaced their plaque with one of my own. Maintenance courtesy of Turner Enterprises, LLC. That's right. I'd gone down to the county office again and registered a small holding company, me as sole member, just to make the paperwork neater. I even opened a business account with exactly $1 in it. The permit fee. Within days, the legend of Turner Enterprises spread like wildfire through the neighborhood. Kids whispered about the guy who owns the street. A few parents started greeting me with cautious smiles, like I might start charging tolls after all. Then came the inevitable, an invitation. The HOA wanted me to attend the annual summer barbecue. The theme was Unity in the Community. I decided to go. I even brought brownies. The event was held in the park beside the lake, string lights swaying in the evening breeze. The entire board was there, wearing matching polo shirts with the HOA logo. Gladys looked surprisingly relaxed. Maybe resignation had mellowed her. When she saw me, she smiled a thin, diplomatic smile. "James, glad you could make it." "Wouldn't miss it," I said. "After all, I had to drive down my street to get here." She chuckled despite herself. "You made your point." "Did I?" I asked lightly. "Because I think the real point is that we all live here, and we might as well make it easier on each other." She nodded slowly. "Truce?" "Truce." We shook hands, and somewhere behind us, Cliff nearly dropped his paper plate in shock. Later, as the sun sank and the lake turned molten gold, I stood by the picnic tables chatting with neighbors who'd once ignored me. People swapped stories about HOA mix-ups, lost mailboxes, mistaken paint codes, petty citations. We laughed instead of arguing. Someone asked, "So you really own the street?" "Yep," I said. "Best accidental investment I ever made." "What'll you do with it?" another asked. I thought about it. Keep it clean, maybe host a block party once a year, no towing, no tickets, just music and food. Cheers followed that suggestion. A few offered to help set it up. Even Gladys smiled from her chair, sipping lemonade. A month later, Turner Lane hosted its first non-HOA neighborhood get-together. We closed the road, not with cones, but with folding tables covered in food. Kids chalked drawings on the pavement. Someone set up a speaker and played old rock songs. Cars stayed parked neatly along the curb, and not a single notice appeared on a windshield. As dusk fell, I looked around at the streetlights reflecting on the fresh blacktop and realized something. Ownership wasn't T about power. It was about stewardship. And the best way to prove a point isn't T to fight people. It's S to make them laugh and then hand them a brownie. Halfway through the night, Gladys raised her cup. "To reading the fine print," she called. Everyone laughed and echoed the toast. Even Cliff managed a grin. I leaned back against my car, the same one that had started all this, and watched the crowd. Families chatting, kids running, music floating over the warm air. For once, no one cared who technically owned what. They were just home. When the last guests drifted away and the streetlights flicked on, I picked up a stray balloon and smiled at the sign down the block. Private road. Access by permission only. Technically true, sure. But from now on, permission was automatic for everyone who lived here. I locked up, turned toward my house, and thought that maybe, just maybe, Monday mornings wouldn't be so bad anymore. Because sometimes the best revenge is peace and paperwork.